Welcome to the premiere episode of Remasterpiece Theater, the show where we talk about the nostalgia of the past and then shift gears into how to update that nostalgia for the modern gaming world. I'm Chris, and I'll be bringing the nostalgia today. Later we're going to be joined by Andrew, who is only just now seeing Parasite Eve for the first time in the year 2020. It's not like he had anything else to do because we're all quarantined. Hooray! Oh, pandemics. Parasite Eve. Released by Squaresoft in 1998, this game was incredibly important to 12-year-old Chris, who was still reeling from the video game high that was Final Fantasy VII just 1 year prior. Given that this was the Dark Ages, I honestly didn't know this game was going to exist until I walked into a Toys R Us with my mom and I saw that PlayStation 1 display showing the very same intro that we're watching right now. My god, the music, the body horror, all of the explosions. It was like the universe somehow knew that the thing I needed most in my life was to see Resident Evil and Final Fantasy VII have a baby, and to let David Cronenberg raise that baby. I fell in love with the game, playing it in my dank basement as a kid, and hey, that love has only matured as I eventually went on to learn more about both the development of the game, but also the history behind the property itself. Produced by Hironobu Sakaguchi, the man who created a little video game series you may know of called Final Fantasy, and it was directed by Takashi Tokita, who previously directed Chrono Trigger. Parasite Eve was put together by basically a dream team. Hell, even Tetsuya Nomura was involved in character design. And he's my favorite character designer at Square, and he's the daddy of the Kingdom Hearts series. Last but most importantly is Yoko Shimomura, who composed the incredible music for the game. For those not in the know, she is a living legend of video game music, who's responsible for the music in the Kingdom Hearts series, the Mario and Luigi RPGs, and that includes Super Mario RPG, by the way, and many, many others. Seriously, a dream team. The first mature rated game in the company's history, it was also one of the first projects they undertook with both a mix of Japanese and American developers. It's also no secret that everyone was seeing the mountains of cash that the Resident Evil franchise was raking in. So a Western-set horror property with a mature focus, it made a lot of financial sense. The setting is New York City, a choice I'm pretty sure can be traced back to early development of Final Fantasy VII. And you're probably thinking, wait, what? Midgar has no relation to New York City. But hey, it's true. Final Fantasy VII originally was going to take place in New York City, the Big Apple, in the modern age of 1999. Man, that would have been a trip. I would love to visit a parallel universe where I could play a Final Fantasy VII that takes place in New York City in 1999. Like, oh my goodness, I would desperately want to see that experience. This stateside development and location scouting means we get to wander around select portions of a fairly accurate 1997 New York City. Which, if you grew up in or around the city like I did, is a real treat. You get to visit Carnegie Hall, Central Park, the Museum of Natural History, St. Francis's Hospital, the Statue of Liberty. Hey, completionists even get to see the Chrysler Building. And of course, my old stomping ground, the New York sewer system. For a PlayStation 1 game, they did a damn fine job of things, let me just say. Parasite Eve is unique in many ways, but the most fascinating element of the game, to me at least, is that it's a sequel to a book. Not inspired by or adapted from, but a proper sequel to a written work. The debut novel of one Hideki Suzuki, pen name Hideki Senna. Parasite Eve went on to become something of a smash hit in Japan, winning awards, quickly getting offers for both film and game adaptations, and they did eventually translate the book for English readers in 2005. So you're in luck if you want to read it. It's on Amazon. I checked. Oh, fun fact while on the subject of the film rights to the novel, while the Japanese movie went on to be directed by Masayuki Ochiya, the American film rights have been rumored for years to be owned by Madonna, of all people. Weird. I've seen rumors that this is not true anymore. I've seen rumors that it's still true. No one seems to have the exact answer, and for some reason, no one's replying to my emails when I reach out to both Square and the author of the novel. Come on, guys, reply back. Since I'm pretty sure Madonna watches Shake the Box, please comment below with the facts, Madonna. Thank you very much. You may be thinking that, oh boy, the guy wrote a sequel to a novel as a video game. How cool is that? Well, it turns out he didn't even know the plot of the game until after it was released. Square worked directly with his publisher, who apparently never really felt the need to bother the guy. But don't worry though, he said he was very impressed with the game once he played it, and the game itself was written by its director, Takashi Tokita. As for how Hideki Suzuki came up with this book, well, the man was a pharmacologist when he wrote Parasite Eve. Inspired by the mitochondrial Eve theory, which was making waves back then in the scientific community, he found the science behind the common ancestry of humanity, paired with the foreign DNA found within mitochondria that inhabit human cells, to be a hotbed of sci-fi horror. What if, he thought, that alien DNA that lives deep inside of us all one day decided to break free and vie for autonomy? The powerhouse of the cell could devastate all of humanity thanks to that shared heritage. So he took his scientific know-how and a vivid imagination and he went to work. While the novel takes place in Japan, as I said before, the game takes place in New York City, specifically 1997 Christmas Eve. We follow our protagonist, Aya Brea, and we spend 6 days in the game chasing Eve, who is slowly becoming more powerful and less human with every encounter. The meat of the story is largely figuring out what Eve's motivations are, how the opera singer Melissa became Eve, and perhaps most importantly, how all of these things relate back to our protagonist, Aya Brea. While merely being in the proximity of Eve causes spontaneous human combustion or mutations, our main character instead develops powers similar to Eve. This, of course, freaks her out, but also it makes her the only one in the city who could stop this crisis and bring Eve down. Personally, I adore the story of Parasite Eve. It has compelling characters who are driven by realistic wants and needs, with Aya's partner Daniel being a standout for me. I'm a sucker for family drama, particularly folks struggling with the notion of parenthood. The plot has nice twists and turns that relate back to the novel in ways that are subtle enough for anyone who read the book to enjoy them, without it being necessary. Honestly, you could play this game without any knowledge of the book even existing, and it works fine. It's a perfect standalone. Most of the science in the game is grounded in reality as well, making for some compelling lessons on cellular biology and mitochondria. Excluding the parts where folks burst into flames or mutate violently, of course. Last I checked, those are not scientifically sound, but hey, anything's possible these days, right? Gameplay, meanwhile, is kind of a cross between Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VII, and Resident Evil. You have random encounters and a pseudo-turn-based combat system, kind of like Final Fantasy VII, but you also have the ability to move your character around to get into or out of attack range, like in Chrono Trigger. And you also have the horror of Resident Evil. Inventory management. Resident Evil's inventory management. That's right. The most frustrating part of this playthrough for me was constantly having to figure out what am I going to not hold on to because I don't have enough room for all this stuff. Ooh. Horror game inventory management. Gives me a shiver just thinking about it. Heck, we even have a magic system thanks to the mitochondrial powers we acquire during the game. When you list it all out, it sounds crazy, but it all blends together so very well. You weave around enemy attacks while your meter builds up, you whip around, unload a magazine into a monster's face, dodge a little bit, and then unleash a beam of mitochondrial energy at an enemy. Being able to evade an enemy attack based on my actions rather than some hidden math equations, it feels really good. It's responsive, it's crunchy, it's satisfying. The game was ahead of its time in so many regards. This is all elevated by the equipment system of the game. As you play, you find various guns, batons, and armor. The key to this, however, is that everything has unique base stats, bonus stats, and passive abilities. You can then use tools that you find in the game to take parts of one item and apply them to another. You do destroy the first piece if you use a standard tool, but hey, like I said, inventory management, it's good to get rid of things and open up space in your inventory. Through careful play, a player can slowly make a collection of bonus stats of massive size that they migrate from gun to gun, along with unique abilities that they harvest from other guns. So rather than constantly swapping to like the newest weapon you find, which is pretty standard fare in RPGs. You know, like, ooh, hey, I got a new thing, equip it. It's often better to instead harvest bits and pieces and wait for like a sizable upgrade in base stats before making a big swap to a new weapon. All this while bringing an increasingly larger stat pool along for the ride. By the end of the game, you have a gun you actually feel sort of attached to. It has double attack actions, has a decent rate of fire, has acid rounds, and of course it has a big old block of bonus stats, making it a real damage dealer. Your armor, meanwhile, has increased pocket sizes, auto heal, increased health pool, and again, a monster stat pool that you're bringing along for the ride. It's fantastic. It's just so much better than just like, hey, I got, you know, here's a Walter PP7 2, it has slightly better stats. Like, it's more personal. And the game really hammers that home at the very end of the game because it actually lets you choose one gun in your inventory, one piece of armor in your inventory. You get to name them, and those carry over into New Game Plus. The game even knows you're going to become attached to one or two pieces of equipment. It's fantastic. It's amazing that this game is so old, and yet I don't see that many games since then that had a similar system. So what we have now is a massively popular breakout book, a creative dream team of big shots at Square, the desire to try and capitalize on the success of the horror genre a la Resident Evil, and the merger of survival horror with traditional JRPG. What does this all combine to make? Well, let me tell you, it combines to make a masterpiece, really. So, what would it take to make this a remasterpiece? Well, alright, as I said, I'm now joined by my good friend Andrew.
Hello.
Who is currently through a wall.
Yeah, that's right. We're technically violating the 6-foot rule, except there's a wall between us, so we're good.
It's true, we're in different rooms, but I'm pretty sure we're only about 4 feet apart.
Probably. Yeah, I could touch the wall. You could, you know.
Oh, I could.
Yeah, there we go. We just.
Quarantines, how much fun. I recently replayed Parasite Eve. Hey, link down below. Ooh. And Andrew, you watched my playthrough.
I got a good gist of what's going on with this game. My first time seeing this game. Never seen it. I didn't really know what it was. Like, I'd heard of it, but I didn't really know anything about it.
Yeah, it's not a game that ever really caught as much traction as other Square soft products. Mm-hmm. But I guess we should start talking about how we make this into a brand new video game, because let me tell you, it didn't really age that well, like graphically or animation wise.
Yeah.
We'll start with graphics and sound. Like, we'll start from there.
Okay.
And to that effect, you've seen the new Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 remakes, I imagine, right?
I don't know if I've seen 3, but I've seen your playthrough of 2, a good chunk of it.
I would love to put forward that that engine, like that particular graphic style, would be perfect for Parasite Eve.
I'm definitely with you on that one. I haven't really played. I haven't really played a lot of games, but I haven't really played Resident Evil, the original ones. But from what I understand, it's basically a locked camera kind of situation. In some ways, not unlike Parasite Eve.
Exactly.
Transitioning from that to the that 3D sort of. You know,
a bit of an over-the-shoulder experience as opposed to the fixed camera angles.
Definitely, yeah.
For Resident Evil, when they were first making the game, they wanted the fixed camera angles and pre-rendered backgrounds as a way to overcome the limitations of the console at the time. Mm-hmm. So it makes a lot of sense, and part of that is why Parasite Eve also did that. Like, it's just a way to reduce variables. You could put a lot more emphasis on your moving character models. You don't have to worry about the background as much.
Yeah, makes sense.
Which is why they both opted for that. And that's partially why I think Resident Evil is such a good go-to point for how you would do this game, because they did the same thing. They took fixed camera angles, pre-rendered backgrounds, and they transitioned that into a remake that uses an over-the-shoulder camera orientation. You could rotate the camera, you could free aim.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that graphical style would be perfect.
I mean, it's a good game to kind of copy off of. A similar theme, similar kind of tone kind of thing.
And it would be historically in line, because Parasite Eve was a response to Resident Evil's success at the time.
There you go.
So why not do it again? Our Resident Evil 2 remake raked in the cash. Like, it did super well, it sold gangbusters, and hey, Square Enix, copy them again. Do it a second time. But yeah, like, the new Resident Evil remakes have all these, like, body horror moments where people mutate and like get lumpy and gooey and explode into flesh globs.
Oh yeah, that'd be
and
fun
like
to
that's
see.
a huge part.
Yeah.
A huge part of Parasite Eve.
There's a lot of goo in this game.
Oh, so much goo. People liquefy, they turn into all kinds of weird, like, gooey, gross things. Skeletons in a museum have flesh crawl up the bones to reanimate the dinosaurs and everything.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool stuff you could see going on there, yeah.
Oh, hell yeah. That engine would be perfect for this. This is really the easy part of this particular recording, is how do you make the game look good? Hey, here's other games that look good.
Yeah. How do you make the graphics better? Well, make them look better.
Like, Square Enix, you know, they used to be Squaresoft, now they're Square Enix. They definitely make some beautiful looking games these days with phenomenal animation, but the style is always... I always like to think if you took anime people and you went, all right, I want to make them like 70% realistic. Like, that's kind of what their modern aesthetic is.
But this would be like a... Well, I don't know. How would you kind of keep that sort of like anime-ish look from the original, or would you try to make them look more realistic?
I think I might opt for more realistic in this one. Like, I know the character art was done by Tetsuya Nomura, the character designer for like Kingdom Hearts and a bunch of other things. And that's why I think those have an anime-esque style to it, but in the game world itself, it didn't look too anime. Like, everyone mostly looked like they were going for realistic, but we don't have the technology yet.
Right, yeah.
Kind of styles.
I definitely was feeling that when I was watching your playthrough, like, ooh, what would this look like as like that Resident Evil remake kind of thing, yeah.
Especially if, like, you know, you're shooting, because Resident Evil, when you shoot someone, like the zombies, it keeps track of, like, where your bullet impacted, and it, like, has deformation, like, on the skull and the skin. Enemies get all gooey and messed up. You can blow off their limbs and stuff.
The combat style in this game, I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Oh yeah, no, this is a very natural segue now that we're slowly pointing it out.
Yeah.
But it works.
You could edit around it, make it look smooth.
Speaking of shooting enemies, let's talk about that good gameplay style that Parasite Eve had.
Yeah, it's a little different than what I've seen.
Yeah, I said this a lot while I was playing the game, like during the playthrough. But not a lot of games have ever lifted that style, and I think that's a huge waste. I think that combat style is super interesting.
Now, does that get ported over to this remake, or, you know, how do you adjust that?
First of all, we said earlier, like, you know, bring the camera down, have it be kind of like right behind Aya, have it maybe over the shoulder, similar to Resident Evil, but also similar to the Final Fantasy VII demo that came out recently. Like, that's a much closer camera, you're not floating in space looking down in cloud anymore, you're like right behind him, and it's more of an action game, the Final Fantasy VII Remake. I kind of want a similar thing for Parasite Eve. I like the idea of you can aim as if you're playing, say, the new Resident Evil game. You know, you stop, you aim. I'm picturing a little bit of aim assist in this.
Okay, yeah.
And you can essentially, like, shoot to your heart's content within, like, a limited action meter kind of thing. So the Final Fantasy VII demo, you basically run around and you could just attack as much as you want. Standard attack, heavy attack, you just hit the buttons.
Right.
And that builds up a meter that lets you use a special.
Okay.
I would like to see this as you could use your baton, which is a weapon I didn't use even once in my playthrough. Have like a button on your controller that's just dedicated to baton, so you can just do physical attacks whenever you want. There's a button for baton.
Yeah.
Have a action meter for your gun. Whenever that's filled up, you can use the number of shots that you have on your rate of fire. If you have like a gun that does 50 damage and you can shoot 2 bullets, when your meter fills, you can shoot 2 bullets that each do 25 damage. The game will aim assist with you, but you can free aim and shoot wherever you want. Give enemies like weak points that you could shoot and exploit. And every time you perform a gunshot or a baton hit, have that fill up your PE meter, and anytime your PE meter is filled enough to do one of those special abilities, you can queue one of those up as well. That way the game still has the action of running around, dodging enemy attacks. You still have like a pseudo turn-based system where you have meters filling up based on your actions. You're still distributing your damage points the same way, but it's a lot more fast-paced this way. Like, you can always use your baton, there's no meter for that. That way the player always has something they can do at any point in time.
Yeah, no, that's good.
And then you have 2 meters, one for your gun and one for your magic power, your mitochondrial power.
Yeah.
I feel like that would up the pace of the game a decent amount.
Yeah.
And I feel like that would be a fun combat system.
Yeah.
While still remaining true to the game.
Yeah, kind of, inspired by and kind of modernized, kind of tweaked. It's good.
The other thing I want to talk about is no more random encounters, because This is 2020.
I mean,
we've moved beyond.
Yeah. No, I will say that was the most boring part of your playthrough. Where I'm like, okay, I know enough about this. Like, those are the parts I skipped.
I think it would be a lot more fun to do it as a modern RPG would do it, which is the enemies exist in the world, so you could see them anywhere. It would actually... So the game has a stat for range, which I'm sure you noticed anytime I was upgrading guns, like there's a range stat.
Right.
I feel like you keep the range stat for this remake. Maybe, we ditched the bubble, but because you could see enemies anywhere in the world, that range stat would immediately be, am I close enough to shoot this thing? Because it doesn't see me right now. Like, it'll allow you to get the drop on enemies. Suddenly having a long-range weapon is actually more viable. Because in the game, like, once you have, like, about 25 range, you're fine. Like, anything above that doesn't matter.
Yeah, because, like, the screen's only so big.
Exactly, like most of the time you're just fine. You can introduce new weapon types that weren't in the game, like rifles.
Yeah.
You can introduce items, like attachments for the gun, such as scope. Like double your range, quadruple your range. You could find scopes to attach the stuff.
And so, like, yeah, when you're assembling your weapon throughout this game, like, I imagine in this version you get to see this wacky weapon that you're making with all the doodads on it.
Like, that's immediately something I would want, is anytime I put a piece on there, like, show me that new stuff. Like, if I have a pistol and I give it, like, explosive grenade rounds, like, I want to see a big old tube on the end of my pistol.
Yeah. That'd be pretty fun.
Same thing with, like, armor. If, like, I'm equipping all these weird things to my armor, like, I want to see my armor change as I add stuff to it. I would love this to... Like, I like the structure of the story, like, being told over the course of days, but you could definitely add some open-world elements to it. Like, have time only advance when you do, like, story missions, but add a bunch of, like, situational side quests, almost. Like, we are talking about a New York City where they're trying to evacuate. You never get everybody. There are people that refuse to leave. There's homeless people that have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And
we can learn a lot from, real life.
Yeah, from what's going on right now.
Yeah.
So day one happens. The scene with the opera house. Carnegie Hall, the opera, everyone bursting into flames. You go through the sewers, you get out, you go back to the police station, and suddenly, like, New York is slowly descending into chaos. Like, this is day one. There's monsters in the streets, but the city is largely populated, and you're a police officer.
Right.
So, like, you would probably have to respond to a number of situations, and that's a great way to add, like, a little bit more tension to slowly build up into these things. You're the only one that, like, actually saw what happened, and people are just taking your word for it that there's, like, a crazy mutagenic monster in the city. No one else but you has seen it and survived, so have day one be a bit more of a, like, ratcheting up of tension, having people, like, slowly believe you, like, reports are coming in, like... A sewer rat the size of, like, a small, like, dog burst out covered in, like, weird pustules and stole a person off the subway platform. Like, that would cause a lot of panic, but also it's mostly rumors.
Right.
And, like, go from there. It could really be a slow burn horror game for the first 2 days, and then, like, have it explode when the first major event is Central Park. It's a huge concert, and everyone there gets liquefied and added into a large flesh ball that goes into the sewers. Like, that could be the turning point. Like, have that slowly build up to that event. Like, there's a lot of fun ways to, like, make this a creepy, scary, slow burn. And then have it blow up. And then later on, you could be going through largely abandoned city streets, and every once in a while you run into someone who couldn't evacuate, or someone who's stuck there, people that need your help. It would be so much cooler.
I mean, you could have a whole bunch of little side quests. Yeah. I have a bit of a pertinent question here. Does this still take place in the 90s?
Oh, that's a great question. That's not something I thought about.
Because what made me think about that is every time you save, you have to go to a payphone.
That's a good point. Oh my god. Screw the 90s. Have this take place in the modern day, and that alleviates one of my major complaints, which is...
the save points?
I hate save points in video games. I hate them. I think they're the worst fucking thing. Screw that. Like, have my character whip out their cell phone anytime they want to save their game. Let me save anywhere.
There you go.
And again, like, that would help. Like, you could be out, like, exploring the New York City streets, and you could receive phone calls, like, when you reach certain areas where you're like, hey, we just got a report of, like, blah, blah, blah going down. Like, can you check it out? Like, add more situations for your character, more experiences to see. You can introduce new characters that way. You could have someone who's, a homeless man who's trying to organize and keep other homeless people safe. Like, that would be a great character to introduce, and they could go places in the story. There's a lot of room for expansion, because it's an 8-hour-long game, and most of that time is spent doing random encounters. And this would allow you to have new characters with like good compelling storylines. It lets Aya go to new places. I would love to see it be a semi-open world, and anytime you go to like one of the major locations, time advances because that's the plot.
Yeah.
The way the equipment worked in the game is you know, you find new guns and you could harvest bits and pieces and put them on the old guns. You could switch guns, you could transfer stats over, and I want to keep all of that. Like,
yeah, that's the fun
I
part.
love that part. Yeah, it's such a great equipment system.
Yeah.
I think it would be a lot more exciting and fun if the player has access to more tools, or maybe just make it so like you only find a limited number of tools, but if you go back to the police station, like you could have it worked on for free by the people that are in the police station, the gun people. And of course, because now we're over the shoulder and we have a little bit more of a free aim kind of opportunity, more kinds of guns. The game largely just had pistols, grenade launchers, and technically there were like machine guns, but you would never know because they behave exactly the same as pistols and grenade launchers.
Yeah, machine guns by name only.
Yeah, basically. You know, rifles so you could pick things off from far away, have like Uzis and machine guns that have burst fire. That way, give players a reason to actually use more than one weapon, because there's no incentive in the base game to ever hold on to more than one gun, because you just make one gun a super gun.
Yeah.
You never need the other ones. Have certain stats that are detrimental to other ones. So like if you have a rifle and you're like, all right, I'm gonna give this like super range, I got a scope on there, like have that diminish another element of it. Like you're gonna give something burst fire, have that reduce the range. That way there's a give and take for these kind of upgrades. That way there's a little bit more variety. There's a reason to have like a primary gun and like a secondary gun, give players a reason to hold on to everything and take things apart in more creative ways. And the big one that I just remembered I wanted to mention is the game has 2 special rounds you can get. You can get acid rounds and ice rounds, and they do additional damage to enemies that are weak to those 2 types. I would say introduce more types. Like if you're already gonna have magical ice rounds anyway, like do fire rounds, do like lightning rounds, and give more enemy variety in the game where it comes to like weaknesses. That way players have an incentive to use their special ability called Scan to find enemy weaknesses.
I really like this. I was just saying, I really like this idea of making the graphics like hyper realistic, and then having it's like, hey, do you have any ice bullets? Like the cops are talking to each other in the precinct.
Listen, man, I saw some like weird creature and it recoiled away from an ice cube I dropped, so I think it's weak to ice. What a natural segue, fellow officer. I would love to see more of that in Parasite Eve, especially like with the open world thing. You could have areas that are more prone to have those kind of enemies that are weak to that, and you're like, all right, I'm doing a mission, I'm going to Central Park, and I know there's a lot of stuff that's weak to acid in Central Park, so let's go. Giving the player reasons to go back to the office, the police station more often, to outfit themselves, give players reasons to revisit different locations throughout the game for side quests and side missions. I think it would be a lot of fun.
I do recall there was like one point where you were trying to save, and there was a environmental hazard. There was like a sparks coming out of the wall. You almost died, and then you did.
Yep, the poison gas.
Oh yeah, that's what it was. It was gas. That's or steam or something.
Or steam, something like that.
Yeah. And I don't know what you think about environmental hazards. Like more or less none.
If we're gonna go with a more like fluid, over the shoulder, like all the stuff we talked about for gameplay, if all of that's in place, I think environmental hazards would actually be pretty interesting, especially if you could use them against the enemies.
Ah, there you go.
That way, like, they could hurt you, but if you're smart about it, you could use them to your benefit.
Yeah, that's
Resident Evil 3 Remake actually did introduce like explosive barrels. There's like, you could find electrical outlets that are short-circuiting. If you shoot them, they'll electrocute everything in a very unrealistic manner in like a 20-foot radius.
That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a video game. Yeah. Like, you suspend that kind of disbelief because it's a mechanic that is fun and beneficial to the player.
If you get ice bullets, that's surely believable.
Yeah. Have like precarious piles of stuff you can knock over onto enemies. Have things you could blow up. Given that like there's so many gooey monsters, it might be fun, because New York City, there's a hydrant on every other street corner, if I recall.
Oh, I never really noticed the arrangement, but there are a lot of them.
But that being the case, like, you could shoot a fire hydrant and have, like, high-pressure water shoot out, so you could, like, lure enemies into an area and blast them away with water.
Yeah.
And have, like, certain enemies that are weak to, like, high-pressure water.
Yeah, I mean, if you're made of goo, that can't be good for you.
Exactly. I mean, even just high pressure water sucks for most people. It's gonna knock you down,
true.
push you around.
Very good point.
Yeah, but for like a gooey thing, like that could really strip you of your whole goo situation.
Yeah.
So environmental hazards could be a fun introduction, a fun addition to the game. Final Fantasy VII Remake introduced a dodge roll button. Dark Souls is my favorite video game series of all time. Dodge rolling is a fundamental gameplay mechanic of that. Resident Evil 3 Remake has a dodge button, like giving the player like, yes, you could run around, but now that we're going for like a much more action-packed gameplay style, giving the player a dodge button is probably going to be crucial.
Yeah. Does seem like it.
And it always feels good when you pull off a good, well-timed dodge.
Yeah.
So I really think that would be a nice addition there. So New Game Plus in this base game, the original Parasite Eve, the only differences are you keep whatever was in your inventory, and you have your 2 items that you get to name at the end of the game. You can name a gun, and you can name a piece of armor, and that comes with you. And I always thought that was super cool, that they're like, hey, you know, you've been using this for a while now, aren't you a little bit attached? You want to give it a cool name? Huh? You want to give that super cool armor you're wearing a cool name? And the only other change they have is there's the Chrysler Building is a huge multi-tiered dungeon. Every floor is a series of encounters you have to go through, and when you reach the top, you get like a secret ending to the game. So New Game Plus, I would love to see as a part of this remake, and some ways you could do it is definitely include the Chrysler Building. When you let the player name their stuff, actually embroider it. Like, if I'm gonna name my super cool like body armor, like on the back of my body armor, like have that name on the top of the body armor so I could see it. Maybe like engraved on the side of my gun, have like the cool name I gave it.
Yeah.
Because like we have that graphical technology. We could have those things on those items. And that would be cool. Other than just making enemies harder, like maybe introduced a couple of like new varieties of enemies. Like even if it's just a palette swap and a couple of new moves, just to keep things fresh. Do we want any kind of multiplayer in this thing?
Well, now that's interesting.
I really like asynchronous multiplayer, where it's not necessarily like I'm playing a game co-op with someone, but like they can affect my game in some interesting way.
Okay.
Like it might be fun if like you could leave things behind or like generate NPCs of some kind.
Yeah.
Like you could make a helpful NPC that might show up in someone else's worlds. Examples of this are Neo. You can leave behind a blue phantom, and players can summon that blue phantom to help you. Because this is a very story-focused game, it wouldn't make sense for Aya to summon in other Ayas to fight with her.
Right.
It would detract from the story ever so slightly. But it might be fun if you could like leave behind like a civilian who can help in a way. Like you get to a hard part of the game and you're like, I'm gonna leave behind a civilian who has a gun and is a combat focused civilian, and then suddenly you can go into a boss fight with like a civilian that can draw a little bit of aggro and can like do a few combat moves. Maybe you could opt instead to leave behind like a medic, like someone who stayed behind because they're a doctor and they want to help, and like they'll heal your wounds. Like players can opt to leave behind civilian characters that feature some helpful thing, be it medics or like people that are trying to fight back. So it's asynchronous multiplayer, but it's multiplayer all the same.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I really like that kind of stuff. Like I like that Dark Souls, like I could find things that players left behind, like messages or notes. That would actually be a pretty fun one for like a post-apocalyptic New York City kind of setting, is like you could leave behind a message and that message would literally be like a graffiti spray saying not safe ahead.
Yeah.
Or like supplies over here.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, okay, let's talk about the story of the game a little bit.
All right.
Largely, I like the story. Like, I don't see much of a need to change all that much. The major beats really should stay the same, which is you have our main character who has a mysterious connection to the villain. You don't really learn about that until later on. It turns out, you know, sister was an organ donor after an accident when they're children, so they have this connection, so on and so forth. Like, I love that. It's a nice slow reveal, but it's a mystery. This Dr. Clamp, you keep on getting these flashbacks. It's like, what's going on? And when you learn about it, it's like, oh, that makes sense in the context of the story, and it's satisfying. It's not like this like shoehorned in thing that feels frustrating and like, what? That doesn't make any sense. It's like, okay, yeah, that works. The things I would like to change are, I think there's a number of characters that are, again, they're just menus with faces.
Yeah.
Like, you have Gun Guy. Torres I like. Torres is like, you know, hey, guns. The problem with cops is like they always want to use their guns. Guns are dangerous. They should be a last resort. Like, he clearly has this background and then he dies and it's like, oh, it's because his kid died in a gun accident. And I'm like, whoops, all right, it's over, goodbye. Like, you can really build it up and like make that so much more meaningful. You could have your character be there for when he doesn't pull the trigger during the attack on the police station.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I like Torres. He's a great example of, like, what we could see more of, is characters that have, personalities.
Yeah, really expand that, yeah.
And again, if we're making this an open world, where you could really wander around, talk to people, and, like, revisit locations more often, when the opera attack happens, you go back to the police station, it's before the whole city descends into chaos, and that's your time to meet these people and get to know them. And then when shit hits the fan, like, these people are scattered around the city, so you bump into them in different situations.
Oh, yeah,
so you can meet someone, and it's like, hey, I'm Officer Sally, and, like, I'm new here, have a rookie character, and then you bump into them later on, maybe in Central Park, or maybe, like, in Chinatown, or in Soho. Like, there's all these different locations that you have moments in where you could bump into officers that are out in the world doing things, and there could be characters with arcs and storylines, and they can give you subquests that you can go off on and do. So I'd love to see, like, all of those police officers get an expanded character arc to them, or at the very least, bare minimum, personalities. The arcs in the game that I like best are, you have your partner Daniel, and he's just trying to, like, understand how to raise his son Ben after a messy divorce, and then, his wife is turned into a pile of liquid flesh that joins the collective. So he's also trying to sometimes Lorraine just turns into a flesh beast,
Well, sometimes that's the way it goes.
So he's also dealing with the loss of his ex-wife, and now he is a single father, and they do an okay job in the game. They do give it a little bit of time. I think you could definitely focus even more on that. Because again, Daniel, I love Daniel. He's my favorite character, I think. And there's a lot of room to introduce new characters that would serve other fun roles in the game, and also provide more, like a lot of people are going to lose family members. There's people that are going to be scared. Like, you could play up all of this stuff to, like, show that this is a citywide catastrophe that no one understands.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, of course, the weakest part of the game is the United States military shows up, and it's like, you're the only solution to this problem, come with us. And it's like, how do they know that? Who told them? You could definitely have, like, military bungles where they show up and it's like, shut up, lady, we know what we're doing. And then after, their jet fighters have their pilots get liquefied and they crash, and suddenly there's fires across New York City because the military didn't listen to the NYPD because they had insider information, then have them come back and say, like, you know what, you're right, you're the only one, now we understand. Like, you could have a whole thing with that. I always wanted the military to have a little bit more of a, like, about face instead of just showing up and being the heroes, because it didn't make any sense in the game. There was no build up to it.
There's a lot of stories to expand. No, I think that's a great idea. It's sort of like turning a movie into a TV show. You're keeping the basic story, but you're expanding on the characters, what they're doing. I mean, I don't know anything about the book, but you might be able to draw some stuff from the book, too.
The major difference I would love to see is, instead of just having the book be like a 5-minute dialogue sequence in this game, I would like to see it as a playable segment of the game in some way.
Ooh.
Metal Gear Solid 5 had a separate game released called Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes. It was a playable prologue to the game. And that ends with, like, the events that lead up to the game, Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain.
I mean, another way you could do it, I don't know if this kind of, like, makes things a little wonky with the story, but if you opened with that, like, I don't know how long it would be, I don't know how long the playthrough would take, but if that was sort of like the cold open, how it's like sometimes, like, in a movie you'll have, like, a cold open and you're like, what did I just watch? And then, like, halfway through the movie you're like, oh, that's what that was.
You could even I'm sorry, I just got really excited. I like your idea, because you could have that be the tutorial.
Yeah.
It's like unrelated characters that you're experiencing the storyline through. It gives you the general, like, story of the Parasite Eve novel. It's leading the player through the mechanics. Like, hey, this is how you augment a gun. Because it's the prologue, you only have, like, 1 or 2 options. Hey, there's different stuff that works against different enemies, but there's only 1 or 2 at this point in this little prologue. And that would be a great way to do it, like a little cold open.
Oh, wow.
And then later on, when you have Maeda talking about what happened in Japan, instead of it just being a text dump, you could actually have flashbacks to what the player went through.
Yeah.
Like, literally, instead of, like, just here's cutscenes, you can have the game stealthily record player positional data, and, like, you could see what you did in these flashbacks.
you gotta like do something really dumb. So, like, he's jumping on a desk or something.
This is a perfect segue into the final couple of things I wanted to talk about.
Oh, sure.
I would love to see, especially for New Game Plus, and Square Enix loves doing this, give like fun alternate costumes, like hats, like weird silly things for New Game Plus. That way if you're doing New Game Plus, when that flashback happens and has all your player data, you could have like the character running around with like giant foam, like pointy hands, like a big old cowboy hat, like just a silly outfit.
Yeah.
I love cosmetics in games. I love them, and I would love to see more of those. Maida in the game keeps on giving you like Japanese lucky charms that you would get from shrines, like good health, safety, so on and so forth. And these are the single most hateful thing a video game's ever done, because they have no effect on you in any way. It doesn't change your stats. It doesn't like make you luckier. It doesn't do anything. It has no gameplay impact except for taking up room in your inventory. These tiny little, like, they take up the same amount of room in your inventory as a grenade launcher. It is infuriating. Every time he gives you one, it's just like, no, you're making the game harder. I think a super cool thing to do for this remake is if he gives you a lucky charm, it does what the lucky charm is supposed to do.
Yeah.
So if he gives you something that's supposed to make you safer, increase your defense. If he gives you something that's supposed to make you luckier, like make enemies miss their attacks more often, or like they trip and fall, or you find items more reliably. Like have them actually do something, A, and then B, have me see them. Like maybe let me like hang them from my gun like a phone charm, or like hang out of my pocket, or like on the back of my bulletproof vest. So yeah, I'm happy with what we've made here. We've made a very good remake of Parasite Eve, I think.
Yeah.
Like we got a beautiful graphics engine thanks to, if we can steal it, the Resident Evil 2 remake, Resident Evil 3 remake. If not, you know, the Final Fantasy remake has a beautiful looking engine, just modify the graphics a little bit to be on the more realistic side, as opposed to like, you know, 70% less anime kind of aesthetic they have for Final Fantasy. Gameplay wise, I love everything we talked about.
Yeah.
Like I would play the hell out of that game.
Sounds good.
And then last but not least, expanded characters, more quests to follow throughout the game, and you keep the core story the same, because the core story doesn't need any changes at all, really. Like even making it take place in the modern day with cell phones doesn't change all that much at all. It just makes it easier for you to communicate with characters and to save your game whenever you want. So yeah, I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts on this remastering of Parasite Eve?
Yeah, not really. I'm looking at my notes. I think we touched all the things. The only thing I had was like it'd be like a funny here we go again ending in the theater where like everything explodes and like oops.
Oh yeah, because I do like the end of it where like they're both freaking out, but it's just the same play as all.
Yeah. I was kind of hoping like, is it just gonna happen again?
And for you watching, thanks for watching. If you have any thoughts on a Parasite Eve remake / remaster, of course comment below and tell us what you would do differently. But more importantly, what is a game that you like, that you always wanted to see a sequel to or a remake of? What should we talk about for future episodes? Give us some ideas for Remasterpiece Theater. I know I have a few more of my own. I know, Andrew, you have one of your own.
I've got a few.
Ooh,
yeah, you
ooh,
actually
few.
know about them, but I don't want to. I don't want to spoil.
Yeah. I'm not gonna. No spoilers. Don't worry.
Yeah, it'll be good.
Yeah. Well, thanks for watching.
Bye, everyone.